So I have 0.5 grams of silver nitrate, and I have 0.5 grams of copper 2 chloride dihydrate. I'm going to add 10 milliliters of water into both. And I'm going to mix to dissolve. And rinse. Rinse the stirring rod. And we'll mix to dissolve the copper 2 chloride dihydrate. So notice the solids have dissolved. We have 2 solutions. I'm going to pour one of the solutions into the other and make note of your observations. What you see is called a precipitate. It's a solid formed from 2 aqueous solutions. We rinse the beaker to transfer any residual solution and pour. So this is a vacuum filtration. We're going to use it to separate the precipitate from what's called the supernate. The supernate is what remains in solution. So I'm going to wet. This is called a Buchner funnel. You set the filter paper inside to cover the holes so that the precipitate remains on the filter paper and the supernatant can be gets transferred into the sidearm flask. I'm going to turn on the vacuum. And I'm going to pour slowly into the Buchner funnel. You use deionized water to help transfer every bit of precipitate. You then leave the vacuum on for several minutes to pull as much water through as possible. So after the precipitate has been sitting in the Buchner funnel for a few minutes, you can turn off the vacuum. And then we're going to carefully transfer the filter paper with the precipitate on top over to a pre-weighed watch glass. All right, so here's the precipitate on the filter paper. We need it to be dry before we weigh it. So I'm going to take it over to the oven. It needs to dry for about 45 minutes. Once it's dry, then it can be weighed on the balance. So here it goes into the oven. So I'm going to take the supernatant, which is in the filter flask. Notice that it is clear, meaning that all of the precipitate was transferred successfully onto the filter paper. I can now use the supernatant to test for the limiting and the excess reagent. So I take a couple mils of the supernatant and transfer it into each test tube. I can then add to it solutions of our copper 2 chloride dihydrate, which is one of our reactants, and silver nitrate, which is the other reactant. So this is the supernatant, and I'm adding copper 2 chloride dihydrate to it. Just add a few drops. Make observations of how it looked before and after addition of the reagent. Here is, again, my supernatant, and now I'm adding a couple drops of the silver nitrate solution. So make observations of what you see here. So again, this is the supernatant plus the silver nitrate. This is the supernatant plus the copper 2 chloride dihydrate. So after 45 minutes, precipitate should be dry. And take it out. Let it cool on the bench top. Once it's cooled to room temperature, I'm going to place it on the balance and weigh it. The filter paper and precipitate can be transferred to a pre-weighed weigh boat and then weighed, just in case that the watch glass is too heavy.